The rescue cat's first night, a rhythmic sleep story of safety and trust. The rain had started just after lunch. One of those February rains that seems to have no beginning and promises no end. It wasn't the dramatic rain of summer storms, all thunder and flash. This was the patient kind, the sort that settles in for the afternoon and whispers against windows, like an old friend sharing secrets. Elara had watched it from the pet store window while the shelter coordinator prepared Miso's carrier, and she had felt something in her chest relax at the sight of it. Rain made the world smaller, quieter. Rain made indoors feel like the right place to be. Now, standing in her apartment with the carrier in her hands, she was grateful for that smaller world. The carrier was heavier than she'd expected. Not because Miso weighed much. He was a small cat, barely 8 pounds according to the shelter paperwork, but because of the weight of responsibility it represented. Inside, she could hear the tiniest shuffle, the whisper of fur against plastic, and then nothing. Silence, the silence of a creature holding very, very still. She had spent the morning preparing what she'd privately begun to call the sanctuary room. It was her bedroom, the quietest space in the apartment, the room furthest from the street noise that filtered up through the old building's bones. She had moved some things out her laundry basket, a stack of books that had accumulated on the floor, the shoes she usually left scattered by the closet. She had vacuumed, then hidden the vacuum deep in the closet because she read that the sight of one could be frightening. She had placed a plush cat bed beneath the window, positioned a ceramic water bowl on one side of the room, and a matching food dish on the other, and set up the litter box just inside the bathroom doorway where it would be accessible but not too exposed. The room looked spare now, almost meditative. The bed was made with a soft gray blanket. Her rocking chair sat in the corner with a small side table beside it, and on that table she had placed a mug of chamomile tea and a book of poetry she owned since college. The lamp on her dresser was dimmed as low as it would go, casting everything in a warm amber light that reminded her of honey. Elara set the carrier down in the center of the room, right on the rug where the floor was softest. She opened the metal door carefully, the small click of the latch seeming enormously loud in the quiet. Then she did what every piece of advice she read had told her to do. She stepped away, not far, just far enough. She lowered herself to the floor and sat cross-legged, her back against the footboard of her bed, several feet from the carrier's opening. Inside she could sense Miso. There was no movement she could see, but there was a quality to the air around the carrier, a held breath feeling like the moment before a question is asked. She let her gaze drift past the carrier to the window, where rain traced slow paths down the glass. The radiator hissed softly, adding its warmth to the room. Outside, the February afternoon was already dimming toward evening, though it was barely 4 o'clock. "Hello, Miso," she said quietly, her voice just above a whisper. "This is your room now. Well, our room. But mostly yours tonight, I think." She paused, letting the words settle into the space. "I'm going to sit here for a little while. I might talk a bit, or I might just be quiet. I am going to unfold this blanket." She reached beside her where she placed a soft fleece throw, "because I thought you might like to know where all the soft places are. This one's mine, but there's one for you too, on that bed by the window." She unfolded the blanket slowly, letting the fabric whisper as it opened. She arranged it over her lap, smoothing it with deliberate movements. Everything slow, everything narrated. She had read that some animals found comfort in predictability and knowing what was about to happen before it happened. She didn't know if this was true for Miso specifically, but it cost her nothing to try, and the rhythm of speaking her intentions aloud was calming her own nerves as well. The carrier remained still. She could see just darkness through its open door, a small cave of shadow. After a few minutes, she stood, still moving with that same deliberate slowness. "I'm going to sit in my chair now," she said. "It's over in the corner, see? It rocks a little. It creaks, actually. You'll hear it, but it's a good sound. At least I think it's good. It's the sound of someone sitting still, which seems like a useful thing for you to know about me." She crossed to the rocking chair and settled into it, tucking her blanket around her legs. The chair gave its familiar creak, a sound she'd grown so accustomed to that she barely heard it anymore. But now, listening with Miso's ears or trying to, she noticed it anew. It was a gentle sound, rhythmic when she rocked, like a heartbeat made audible. She picked up her book and opened it to a page somewhere in the middle. The poems were short, mostly about nature, the kind that used simple words to describe complicated feelings. She began to read aloud, not projecting her voice, but not quite whispering either, just speaking, as if to a friend sitting nearby. "Listen," she read, "to the sound of rain on different surfaces. On stone it is a drum, on leaves a whisper, on glass a conversation with itself." She rocked gently, the chair settling into its rhythm. Creak and sway, creak and sway. She turned a page, the paper making a soft sound like a sigh. "The clouds do not apologize for their weight," she continued. "They simply release it, trusting the earth to receive." Outside, the rain intensified slightly, tapping more insistently at the window. She glanced up from her book and saw that full darkness has arrived. The street lights below were haloed in mist. Her reflection looked back at her from the window, ghostly and gentle, and beyond it the room repeated itself in glass. The lamp, the carrier, the empty space where Miso was and wasn't. Time moved differently in that room. Without the usual markers, television, phone, the progression of tasks completed, Elara found herself existing in a kind of continuous present. She read poem after poem, her voice becoming part of the room's texture, along with the rain and the radiator and the steady creak of her chair. She sipped her tea without tasting it, turned pages without always registering their words. She was simply there, being a presence that was patient and unthreatening, a background against which Miso could begin to imagine himself existing. An hour passed, perhaps more. The tea had gone from warm to cool to room temperature. She had read through an entire section of the book and started another. And then, in the small space between one poem and the next, she saw it. Movement at the carrier's door. She didn't look directly. She'd learned this from watching birds, that direct eye contact can feel like aggression, like challenge. Instead, she kept her gaze on her book and used only her peripheral vision to track what was happening. A paw emerged, ginger-colored and small, the fur slightly matted in the way of shelter cats who'd been through stress. The paw extended, touched the rug, retreated, extended again. This time it stayed. Elara turned a page, the sound soft and unthreatening. She began the next poem, something about winter gardens sleeping beneath snow. Her voice didn't change pitch or speed. She was simply continuing what she'd been doing, offering no reaction to this enormous act of bravery occurring 6 feet away. Another paw appeared, then a face, pushed forward just enough that she could see one eye in the lamplight, wide and amber and watchful. A whisker, the delicate triangle of an ear. And then, in the time it took her to glance down at her book to find her place in the stanza, Miso had vanished from the carrier entirely. She heard the softest sound of paws on hardwood, a skitter of movement, and when she looked up, still not directly still, using only that careful peripheral awareness, she saw that he had relocated himself to a flattened cardboard box she'd left near the closet. She almost smiled, but caught herself. Instead, she simply continued reading. The cardboard box had been an impulse, something she'd nearly thrown in the recycling, but then decided to leave out. It was from a delivery of books, sized perfectly to fit a small cat, and she'd noticed at the shelter that many of the cats seemed to gravitate toward boxes of any kind. This one she'd placed on its side with the flaps cut away, creating a little tunnel cave hybrid that seemed to promise both security and multiple escape routes. Miso had chosen it well. From where Elara sat, she could see into the box's opening, and what she saw made something warm bloom in her chest. One ginger ear, perfectly upright and swiveling to track sounds. The tip of a tail curled around what she assumed was his body, and most wonderfully a single whisker protruding from the box's edge, white and sensing the air. She read on, this time choosing a new poem about architecture, about how buildings learned to hold space for the people inside them. As she read, she catalogued what she could see of Miso's improvised fortress. The box sat at an angle that gave him a view of most of the room while keeping his back to the solid wall. He could see the door, the window, and Elara herself, all without exposing himself. It was, she realized, exactly where she would have hidden if she were small and uncertain and new to this place. "I'm going to get more tea," she said, closing her book on her finger to mark her place. "The kitchen is down the hall. You won't see me, but you'll hear me. The floorboards creak and the hallway fourth board from this door is the loudest. The refrigerator hums when I open it. The kettle will whistle in about 5 minutes, but it's a quiet whistle. More of a suggestion than a demand." She stood, making her movements broad and predictable. She walked to the door with heavy footsteps, not stomping, but not trying to be silent either. She'd read that silent movement could be more frightening than predictable noise because it suggested stealth, suggested hunting. She wanted Miso to always know where she was, to never have to startle at her sudden appearance. In the kitchen, she went through her routine exactly as she'd narrated it. The fourth floorboard did creak, the refrigerator did hum, the kettle did whistle its polite whistle, and she poured the water over a fresh tea bag, watching the water bloom dark amber. She added honey this time, stirring slowly, the spoon making small chiming sounds against the ceramic. When she returned, Miso was still in his box. She could see both ears now, and what might have been the curve of his back. Progress, she thought, or at least not regression. She settled back into her chair and opened her book to a new section, one she hadn't read in years. These poems were about gardens, about the patience required to grow things. She read about soil preparation, about the waiting between seed and sprout. She read about how some seeds needed darkness to germinate, how they had to be buried deep and trusted to find their own way up toward light. Trust can't be rushed, she read, and then paused because the line seemed to speak directly to this moment. The seed knows when it's safe to open. The gardener's job is not to force the bloom, but to provide the conditions in which blooming becomes possible. She looked up from the book, not at the box, but at the window. I think that's true for more than just seeds, she said softly, speaking to the room, to the rain, to the small frightened creature listening from inside cardboard walls. I think sometimes we all need to know that we're allowed to take our time, that being careful isn't the same as being broken. The radiator clanked, one of those sudden sounds old heating systems make, and she saw the ears in the box swivel toward it. That's just the radiator, she said. It does that. It's grumpy but harmless, like an old dog that barks at nothing in particular. It's the building's way of keeping us warm. She rocked and read and rocked. The rhythm of it was meditative, almost hypnotic. She found herself breathing in time with the chair's movement, her voice rising and falling with a gentle sway. The rain continued its patient work against the windows, and the lamp cast its honey light over everything, softening edges, making the whole room feel like something from a memory or a dream. Time passed. She couldn't have said how much. The poems blurred together into a kind of extended meditation on growth and patience and the wisdom of things that wait. She read about birds building nests one twig at a time. She read about rivers wearing through stone, not through force, but through persistence. She read about the moon pulling tides, about how even the ocean learned to trust that rhythm, learned to follow that silver voice across the curve of the world. And then she became aware of a new quality in the room, a tension that hadn't been there before. She glanced up, careful not to move her head, only her eyes. Miso was looking at the closet. Both ears forward, body low, she could see more of him now, could see that he'd shifted position in the box so that he faced the closet door, which she'd left slightly ajar. His gaze was fixed on something inside that darkness, and even from across the room she could sense his uncertainty, the way his body had gone very still. She followed his gaze and understood immediately. The vacuum cleaner. She could just barely see it from where she sat, a hulking shape in the closet's shadows. To Miso, it must have looked like some kind of creature, crouched and waiting. "Oh," she said softly. The scary thing in the closet. She set down her book and stood, moving slowly. "I'm going to show you something," she said. "It's okay if you don't believe me right away. Sometimes we need to see something lots of times before we can trust that it's safe." She walked to the closet and opened the door fully, reaching inside to pull the vacuum into the room's light. It rolled on its wheels with a plastic clatter that she tried to muffle, and she positioned it in the middle of the floor where it could be clearly seen. "This is a vacuum cleaner," she said, keeping her voice even and calm. "It's loud when it's on, but it's not on now. See?" She tapped its canister gently with her knuckles, the sound hollow and unthreatening. "It's just a tool. It cleans the floors. Right now it's sleeping, and it's going to stay sleeping for a long time. Days, probably." She crouched beside it, making herself part of the tableau. "When I do use it, I use it in other rooms first. You'll hear it, and you can hide anywhere you want, and that will be okay. But for now, I just wanted you to see that it's just a thing. It doesn't move by itself. It doesn't decide to chase anyone. It just sits here, being a vacuum, until someone decides to use it." She stood and rolled it back toward the closet, but this time she left the closet door open wide. "There," she said. "No more shadows for it to hide in. You can see exactly where it is any time you want to check." She returned to her chair, watching from the corner of her eye as Miso's ears gradually relaxed, swiveling away from the closet to track other sounds. The rain, her movements, the building's old pipes groaning somewhere in the walls. She picked up her book again, but found she didn't want to read anymore. Instead, she simply sat, rocking gently, letting the silence of the room expand and settle. This was a different kind of quiet than before, not the hell-breath quiet of waiting, but something more comfortable, more inhabitable. This was the quiet of a space learning to hold two lives at once, learning the shape of shared existence. She thought about the life Miso must have lived before the shelter. The coordinator had been vague on details. He'd been found as a stray, thin and scared, no chip, no collar. However long he'd been out in the world alone, it had taught him to be wary. And then the shelter, with its noise and chaos, its smell of too many frightened animals in too small a space, its well-meaning. "You know," she said softly, still rocking, "I used to be scared of new places too, new apartments especially. I'd move in and everything would feel wrong for weeks. The walls were the wrong color, the doors were in the wrong places, the sounds at night were all unfamiliar. I'd lie in bed and hear the building settling or neighbors moving around, and I'd feel like I'd never sleep properly again." She paused, listening to the rain. "But eventually, always eventually, it would start to feel like home. Not because the building changed, but because I learned its rhythms. I learned which floorboard creaked, which pipe rattled, which neighbor walked their dog at 6 in the morning. And once I learned those things, once I knew what to expect, the place stopped being strange and started being mine." She looked toward the cardboard box, where 2 ears and a pair of eyes now reflected the lamplight. "You're going to learn this place," she said, "and I'm going to help by being predictable, by being exactly where you expect me to be, doing exactly what I say I'm going to do. That's how we build trust, I think. Not through big dramatic gestures, but through small, reliable ones. Through being boring in the very best way." The room settled around her words. She let her eyes close just for a moment, feeling the weight of the day, the strange intimacy of this careful dance she was performing with a creature she barely knew. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed that the room's geography had shifted subtly. The plush bed under the window, the water bowl, the food dish, they all seemed more integrated into the space now, less like props in a stage set and more like furniture in a life. She stood and moved toward the water bowl, narrating as she went. "I'm going to check your water," she said. "Not because I think you've drunk any yet, it's still full, I can see that from here, but because I want you to know where it is, and I want you to see me interacting with it, showing you it's safe." She knelt beside the bowl, dipping her fingertip into the water. "It's cool," she said. "Fresh. The bowl is ceramic, so it stays cool for a long time. I put it here because it's away from the food. I read that cats don't like their water too close to their food. Something about instinct, about not wanting to drink water that might be contaminated by prey. I don't know if that's true, but it seemed like good advice." She moved to the food dish next, still narrating. "This is where your food is. I'm going to put a little bit down now, even though you probably won't eat tonight. That's okay. It's there when you're ready. It's a fish pate the shelter said you liked fish. I hope they were right." She opened the small can she'd left on the dresser, the metal lid peeling back with a soft pop. The smell of fish filled the room, not unpleasant, but very present. She spooned a small amount into the dish, smoothing it with the back of the spoon. "There, a midnight snack if you want it, or a breakfast, or just something to sniff at and ignore. Whatever you need it to be." She washed her hands in the bathroom sink, leaving the door open so Miso could track her movements by sound. The water ran, the soap made its small squelching sound, the towel rustled as she dried her hands. Everything ordinary, everything narrated by the sounds themselves. When she returned to her chair, she noticed that Miso had shifted again. He was more visible now, his whole face emerging from the box, and she could see the pattern of his markings. Ginger and white with a small pink nose and those amber eyes that seemed to hold entire histories in their depths. She picked up a different book from the side table, a novel she'd been meaning to reread. "I think I'm done with poetry for tonight," she said. "I'm going to read a story now. It's about a woman who moves to a small town and opens a bookshop. Nothing scary happens in it. People drink a lot of tea and have quiet conversations and learn about each other slowly." It seemed appropriate. She opened the book and began to read. Not just the dialogue, but the narration too, all of it aloud in that same gentle voice she'd been using all evening. She read about the bookshop's layout, about the way light fell through its windows at different times of day. She read about the careful selection of books, about how the main character learned each customer's taste over time, learning to match people with books the way some people match wine with food. The rain had softened to a drizzle now, barely audible against the windows. The room was warm, almost drowsy in its comfort. Elara felt her own eyes growing heavy, but she continued reading, her voice perhaps a touch slower than before, a touch softer. She read about trust in that book too, though the word was never used. She read about the way the bookshop owner gradually became part of the town's fabric, how she learned people's names and stories, how she became someone they could rely on to be there, steady and unchanging whenever they needed a quiet place to exist. "That's the thing about home," she read, or maybe she was adding her own commentary now, the line between the book's words and her own thoughts blurring in the late hour. "It's not about the walls or the furniture. It's about the feeling that you're allowed to be yourself, completely, without performance or defense. It is about knowing that you're safe to be exactly as scared or as brave as you actually are." She looked up from the book, her gaze drifting toward the window. 3 hours had passed, maybe 4. The night had deepened into that particular stillness that comes after midnight, when even cities seem to pause and breathe. The rain had stopped entirely now, leaving only the occasional drip from the gutters, a gentle percussion that sounded almost musical in the silence. Movement caught her eye. Miso was emerging from the box, his body low and careful, each paw placed with extreme precision. He crossed a few feet between his box and the water bowl, and Elara felt her breath catch in her throat. She forced herself to remain still, to keep her eyes on her book, even though every instinct wanted to watch the small miracle occurring in her peripheral vision. She heard it before she saw it clearly, the delicate sound of lapping, tongue against water, rhythmic and soft. She turned a page of her book, the rustle of paper covering any small sound she might have made. She kept reading aloud or pretending to, her voice steady and unremarkable, providing a backdrop of normalcy against which Miso could do this tremendously brave thing. He drank for perhaps 30 seconds, perhaps a minute. Then she heard the soft placement of paws on wood, the whisper of movement, and when she glanced up carefully, he was gone again, not back to the box somewhere else. She scanned the room with just her eyes and found him, beneath the bed, pressed into the far corner where the wall met the floor, his eyes reflecting the lamplight like two small golden coins. "Good water?" she asked quietly, conversationally, as if they were old friends discussing ordinary things. "I'm glad you drank some. It's important to stay hydrated, especially on a day like this. Big changes take a lot out of us." She closed her book and set it aside. "I think I'm going to get ready for bed," she said. "It's late and I'm tired, and I imagine you might be too. I'm going to do some boring human things, brush my teeth, wash my face, change into pajamas. You'll hear me moving around, but I'll try to be quiet. And then I'm going to get into bed and turn off most of the lights. I'll leave the lamp on just dim, in case you want to explore more. But I'll be sleeping, or trying to, and you can do whatever feels right for you." She stood and moved through her nighttime routine, narrating key moments, but not every single action. She brushed her teeth in the bathroom, the sound of the brush a small rhythmic scratching. She washed her face, the water running and then stopping. She changed into soft flannel pajamas in the bathroom, giving Miso privacy from the vulnerability of her own body, though she doubted he cared. When she emerged, she dimmed the lamp even further and crossed to the bed. She pulled back the covers and slid between the sheets, arranging her pillows, settling herself in. The bed was cool at first, but her body heat quickly created a warm cocoon. She lay on her side, facing away from where Miso hid beneath the bed, giving him the gift of not being observed. "You know," she said softly into the darkness, "I read something once about how healing isn't linear, that it's normal to feel safe one moment and scared the next, that sometimes we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and that's not failure, that's just how learning to trust works, especially when we've been hurt before, or scared or lost." She paused, listening to the building around her. Somewhere above, someone was walking across their floor. Somewhere outside, a car drove past, its tires hissing on the wet pavement. Normal sounds, the sounds of a world continuing on, but distant enough to feel safe. "I want you to know," she continued, her voice almost a whisper now, "that there's no schedule here. No timeline. You don't have to be brave on anyone's timeline but your own. If it takes you a week to come out from under that bed, that's fine. If it takes a month, that's fine too. I'm not in a hurry. This is your home now, and you get to decide what that means and when it means it." She closed her eyes, feeling sleep begin to pull at her. "I'm going to sleep now," she murmured. "Or try to. I'll probably wake up a few times, I usually do. If you hear me moving around, it's just me being a restless sleeper. Nothing to worry about. And in the morning, whenever morning happens to be, I'll get up and make coffee and probably read for a while. And you can keep being exactly as cautious as you need to be." The room settled into its night-time rhythms. Her breathing deepened and slowed. The lamp's glow was barely more than a suggestion of light, enough to see shapes and shadows but not details. The radiator hissed occasionally, the building creaked and settled, and beneath the bed, invisible but present, Miso listened to all of it, learning the language of this new place. Elara drifted toward sleep, but just before she fell completely, she felt it something in the room shifted. Not a sound, not exactly, but a quality of presence. She opened her eyes just slightly, not enough to seem awake, and through her lashes she saw a small ginger shape emerge from beneath the bed. Miso moved with extreme caution, his body low, each step tested before weight was committed. He crossed the floor to the food bowl and sniffed at it, his whiskers twitching. He didn't eat, but he investigated, learning the smell, the placement, the fact of its existence. Then he moved to the plush bed she'd placed under the window. He sniffed that, too, circled it once, twice, testing its dimensions. He didn't get in it, but he touched it with one paw, pressing down to test its softness. Elara kept her breathing deep and even, kept her eyes barely slitted. She was watching something sacred. She knew, the first explorations of a creature, beginning to believe that maybe, possibly, this place might be safe. Miso completed his circuit of the room, investigating the scratching post, the cardboard box from a different angle, the closet with its now visible and clearly sleeping vacuum cleaner. And then, as if satisfied with his reconnaissance, he returned to the space beneath the bed. But this time he didn't press himself into the far corner. He settled closer to where Elara lay, still hidden, but perhaps only a foot from where her hand dangled over the edge of the mattress. She let her eyes close fully, a smile touching her lips. Progress, she thought. Not a linear journey, not a straight line from fear to trust, but a spiral circling closer, testing and retreating and testing again. She was nearly asleep when she heard it. A soft sound, almost inaudible, like a question asked in a language she was only beginning to understand. She opened her eyes and turned her head slightly, looking toward the space beneath the bed where she knew Miso was, though she couldn't see him clearly in the darkness. And there, in the dim glow of the lamp, she saw two eyes looking back at her, amber and steady, watching her with an intensity that felt like assessment, like the careful weighing of evidence. She held very still, barely breathing, and then, remembering something she'd read, something about the way cats communicate trust, she looked directly at those eyes and blinked. Not a normal blink, but a slow, deliberate closing and opening of her eyes. A gesture that said, in the silent language of creatures who understand fear, "I see you. I'm not a threat. You're safe here." The moment stretched out, held in the balance. And then, so slowly she almost missed it, Miso blinked back. The same slow, deliberate closing and opening of eyes. A reply in the same language. A response that said, tentatively, carefully, but unmistakably, "I see you too. Maybe, possibly, I believe you." Elara felt something unlock in her chest, something warm and tender and almost tearful. It wasn't trust, not yet. It wasn't love, not the kind that comes with time and history and accumulated evidence. But it was a beginning. It was a willingness to consider the possibility. It was the first word of a conversation that might take months or years to complete. She smiled in the darkness and let her eyes close again. For real this time. "Good night, Miso," she whispered. "Welcome home." The room settled into its final configuration for the night. The lamp glowed softly. The radiator breathed its warmth into the air. Outside, the city slept its restless sleep, and inside, two creatures, one human. One feline rested in the particular peace that comes from being exactly where you need to be, exactly as you need to be, without apology or performance or fear. And beneath the bed, in the safe darkness of that sheltered space, Miso closed his eyes and allowed himself for the first time in longer than he could remember to sleep without keeping one ear always alert for danger. Because somewhere in the slow accumulation of the evening's small kindnesses, the narrated movements, the gentle voice, the patient presence, the slow blink exchanged in lamplight, He had begun to understand what Elara had been trying to tell him all along. That sanctuary isn't a place you arrive at. It's a practice you build, one small reliable action at a time. It's the accumulation of moments when you're allowed to be scared without being punished for it, when you're allowed to take your time without being rushed, when you're allowed to be exactly as guarded or as open as you need to be, and still be worthy of warmth and safety and home. The night deepened. The rain, finished with its patient work, had moved on to other cities, other windows, and in a small apartment in the city, in a room that smelled of chamomile tea and fish bait and the particular clean scent of fresh blankets, two beings slept, one in a bed, one beneath it, both breathing in rhythm with each other, both held in the same shelter, both learning slowly what it means to provide safety for another, and in doing so, to find it for yourself. If this story resonated with you, if it helped you find that quiet space between waking and dreaming, please consider showing your support with a like, and subscribe to Deep Sleep Stories Hub for more quiet nights and restful journeys. May you sleep deeply, may you wake gently, and may you always know that you allowed to take all the time you need to feel safe.